Blessings, everybody. Good evening. As you can see, I'm not in the usual spot tonight. I'm in Bodhipala Monastery, South Australia, near Adelaide. And so we're very happy you can join us. The program tonight is slightly different because we just did a session earlier with meditation and chanting. So tonight we'll begin straight off with a talk, and then afterwards there's a chance for you to ask questions. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So blessings from Bodhipala Monastery. Today in Australia, it's Father's Day, which for me as a Buddhist monk always makes me think of Buddha, as well as my own father, of course. But we also look at the Buddha as a kind of father, because one of the ways they describe Buddhist monks is they call us sons of the Sakyans. And the Buddha was actually a leader of the Sakyan people. And we're as if offspring or children or the sons of the Buddha. And also makes me think of Ajahn Chah, because as my teacher, one of the ways you address your teacher in Thailand is you call them Po Me Krubaja. So Krubaja means teacher, Po Me means mother and father. So not only do you call your teacher, like Ajahn Chah, father, but you also call him mother. Because a teacher embodies these qualities. Whatever you see, the good you see in a mother and a father, the teacher tends to be very complete in their spiritual practice, and they embody some of those qualities too. So it might be a cliche, but you sometimes see fathers as more firm, strict, laying down the law in the house kind of thing. And so Ajahn Chah could certainly be like that in his monastery and as a teacher. And some monks will tell you when they lived with him, they were afraid of him. Not afraid that he would hurt them physically or verbally, but afraid of his goodness, afraid of his mindfulness and wisdom, afraid that he could read their minds and know what they were thinking, and they knew their thoughts were not always that pure. And just afraid of his general barami or presence coming from his well-developed mind. So a little bit like a father. Fathers sometimes instill a bit of fear, but hopefully for the right reasons, because we need that in life. We need examples and figureheads who remind us of what goodness is and what is right and wrong. That can help us in our practice. But then Ajahn Chah would also be very compassionate, forgiving, because he had no more attachment himself, and he would, he let go of his anger, his pride and conceit, his selfishness. So he had many of the qualities of a mother, because mothers tend to be very selfless and compassionate to their offspring. So he was a good example of somebody who was both a mother and father to the Sangha and lay community, like the Buddha. So Father's Day, Mother's Day are days we not only think of our birth parents, but also our spiritual parents, like the Buddha or Ajahn Chah. And Ajahn Chah would relate to his Sangha of monks and nuns like a parent quite often. not being kind of condescending or over controlling or anything, but simply with a concern, like a parental concern for the well-being of his students. So sometimes that meant he could be quite strict with somebody if they needed a bit of reminding of what they should be doing in the practice, or they needed more discipline and needed somebody to help them to develop that. Or he could be reassuring when people were having doubts, or soothing, very kind if somebody was suffering a lot. And whatever was needed, his concern for his students was clear. And I don't think anyone really had much doubt that he had the best interests of his students at heart in his teaching and the way he ran his monastery and the way he related to people. Very compassionate, but very wise and very mindful. And some of his power came from this intense mindfulness, always right in the present moment, right there. When, of course, most practitioners, when they begin the practice, they're not that mindful and they know it. So when you're not very mindful and you meet a teacher who is mindful, it kind of highlights your own lack of mindfulness, maybe your own attachment to views and opinions, sense of self, and so on. And the teacher often reveals that to you just by their presence. So sometimes people living with Ajahn Chah, they'd be a little bit on edge because they're with the teacher and they know the teacher is aware of them sometimes and their mistakes or their negative thinking or whatever it may be. But Ajahn Chah would often soften this because people took their practice seriously, they wanted to do well, and sometimes they felt, self-critical or guilty or disappointed in themselves because they knew they weren't yet that pure or that well developed in the practice. He would soften that sometimes by showing kindness and empathy, or often he showed his sense of humor, tease people, and just find ways to help them through their own suffering so that they could see themselves. Because he wasn't always trying to teach people to, how it is, what things should, the way things should be, how they should be practicing. More, he was trying to encourage them to reflect for themselves and learn for themselves what they need to do with their particular character and personality, because everyone's different. And he wasn't trying to impose himself on everyone and make them like him or make them in a certain way. It was more just helping them to be more aware of themselves and then learn where maybe they were attaching too much and causing themselves suffering and so on. We were talking earlier about, in the monastery here, about the practice of meditation and developing samadhi. And one of Ajahn Chah's favorite kind of teases was that he'd talk about the monk who likes to go off into the quiet place, maybe a very quiet mountaintop or into the cave, and try and get the perfect situation for his meditation. Because in the beginning, we're often really dependent on external conditions. We don't like any distractions and disturbances. We want the people that we like and get on with around us. We don't want anyone around us who doesn't agree with us or doesn't fit with us. We want the right food and the right climate and the right place, and we don't want any noise and disturbances. Many meditators think like that, and the monks are the same. And so Ajahn Chah would tease the monks. They come back from the mountaintop or the quiet forest or the still, peaceful cave, and he'd kind of poke them a bit and say, "Oh, how attached to your cave are you? How attached to your mountaintop are you?" Because it's one thing to meditate in the place that where you're trying to create the most perfect conditions, no noise to disturb you, no people that you don't like or get on with, Everything is just right, the right climate and temperature, the right food, the right situation, everything good and right. And then you come out of that and you tease them and say, well, what's your meditation like now when you're with more people than you would like, maybe, or more activity than you would like? People would come back to his monastery and say, oh, there's too much chanting, or there's too much work, or there's too this, too that. And he would tease them and joke about it with them. And he'd say, if you really want to make your practice develop and go far, you have to be able to practice in all situations. Because we're learning to develop internal qualities, mindfulness, effort, wisdom and understanding, compassion and kindness, restraint, composure. And all these qualities are internal, they're not dependent on the external surroundings. And he'd say, it's a very kind of weak kind of samadhi or meditative state of stillness that is dependent on the external conditions. As soon as you come away from those conditions, your samadhi will disappear, and that's not much use. You need mindfulness, you need effort, and you need some understanding and wisdom as well to help you. So it's just as important to practice when you're out of the cave as when you're in it. And you can't just cling to your cave or your mountaintop to practice all the time. You have to be able to adjust to the different situations. And he's well known for that. He would go visit monks in different places, and some of the places monks live were very noisy or busy or not particularly conducive, you would think, for samadhi. Ajahn Chah would go and visit, and he'd meditate there, and he wouldn't complain, and he wouldn't make any problems out of it. He'd just get on with his practice and show by example that, really it's about your mind that's the important thing, more than the conditions. That isn't to say that, trying to set up your meditation spot in your house or finding quiet places to meditate sometimes isn't important. Of course, there's a role for that. It's part of the practice. But we also have to take our practice beyond that. Ajahn Chah was very good at poking fun at people and pointing out if they were getting too attached to the conditions. So sometimes, he would play around with people. He was once offered a piece of land on the edge of Bangkok, right near the international airport. Because in those days, the land around it was just swamp and didn't cost too much. And somebody who worked in the Air Force, because the Air Force air base was next to the international airport, they offered him some swampland to build a monastery. They had faith in Ajahn Chah. And he went down there and he sent monks down there to live in this swamp. And every day there were international jet flights going over, and as time went on, more and more planes would go over the lands, and it reached a point where like every 5 or 10 minutes there was another jumbo jet or another jet plane going over the monastery. But the monks who he sent there just learned to meditate and not bother about the sound of the jets. But any newcomer would come down from the quiet forest and say, oh, this is difficult to meditate, can't meditate here. And the monks would say, well, is the problem the flight, the jet plane noise, or is it your mind complaining? And they all learned that lesson. I was sent there about 4 years after I became a monk. I was sent there and I had the same reaction. I thought, oh, I'm never going to be able to meditate here on the flight path of an international airport. But you can. You just learn to let go of the noise or the disturbance. And we even had a joke because there was one route run by Thai Airways, and obviously this was at the airport, the international airport for Thai Airways. There was one pilot who every night at 1 a.m. would do a special, he'd do a short cut over the monastery. He's supposed to do a big wide circle and then come into land at the airport, but it saved him some time and fuel if he came over the monastery in a very tight circle before landing. So he would go right over the monastery at 1 a.m. every night. And we got to know him because if it's every night, you remember that. And the plane was so low and so loud, my kuti, which is a little kuti, a little hut, 2 by 3 meters on stilts in the swamp, it would shake and rattle because this plane was so low. So I would always wake up at 1 a.m. if I was asleep. And sometimes I'd never get back to sleep. So I just started changing my attitude. At first, I thought, oh, who is this guy who flies over the monastery so low? And the Abbot Ajahn would say, oh, yeah, it's this Thai Air Force pilot. He's just cutting the corner. And so we have to put up with this noise, extra noise. And he said, does it bother you? And I said, well, yeah, it's a bit annoying, wakes me up every night. He said, well, you have to change your attitude. So I started to spread metta to the pilot and the people on the plane. And I started to look at it differently. I thought, well, he's waking me up so I can do more meditation. So instead of feeling, negative thoughts towards this pilot, I started to think, oh, he's helping me to meditate more. Maybe he'll be the cause for me to be enlightened. I changed my attitude towards him. Ajahn Chah was like that. He would send monks to places which were not always ideal. Sometimes there were places where the people were so poor that there was hardly any food. Like another monastery I went to called Wat Kun, it's an island in a reservoir, and the people around were very poor. The village is right on the edge of the border between Thailand and Laos, and the people were very poor. And you go on alms round and they just give you rice most of the time, with occasionally a little bit of food with the rice. And nobody visited the monastery to offer food. And Ajahn Chah knew that. All the monks knew that. They knew if you go there, you'll become very skinny and you're not going to get a good meal very often. But you just accept it and you work with it rather than say, oh, I should be somewhere where there's better food. You just say, well, I'll just make use of this situation to practice. Or Luang Por Sumedho was sent to a monastery, Suan Gloy, where the food was really poor quality because the people were just so poor. And it's very hot and dusty. The trees were very small, not much shade. So it's a very difficult place to practice. And Ajahn Chah knew that, but he said, oh, just go and practice there, see what it's like. And he didn't make a fuss if a monk came back from a place that they'd been sent to, but he hoped that they had learned something. And he would say, everything is teaching us, because that was his wish, is that you learn from the situations you're in rather than trying to always control and get the best, perfect conditions. And actually, if you spend a lot of time trying to make the perfect conditions for meditation, one thing is you can waste a lot of time because you might never quite succeed. Another thing is your mindfulness and your practice becomes quite fragile. And as soon as you come out of your perfect place, your mindfulness, your samadhi, your meditation just crumbles, doesn't it? Because you haven't built up the strength. And sometimes we have to rely a lot on endurance and patience with other people, patience with the weather, patience with the food or the climate, or the sound if you're near somewhere that's a noisy place like a road or an airport. All these kind of obstacles are things you have to learn from rather than always escape from. People are the same. In monasteries, you get a variety of people coming to live and train and visit. So some monks would always say, oh, there's too many people here, or not the right kind of people, or I don't like this monk, or I don't like that monk, I can't meditate. And Ajahn Chah would just laugh and say, well, what's the problem? Is it that person, or is it your mind, what you're creating out of the situation? And again, he might send, if someone complained too much, he'd send them off, say, oh, you don't get on well with that monk, okay, I'll send you somewhere else. And he'd send them to maybe to a graveyard where nobody wanted to go. Everyone was scared of ghosts in those days. They'd send the monk off to a graveyard where they're all on their own and they're afraid of ghosts at night. And then the monk back in the monastery who had annoyed them didn't seem so bad when you're staying in a graveyard full of ghosts or the possibility of ghosts. Or he'd send them off somewhere where there might be malaria, because in those days a lot of jungle and forests had malaria. And that's far worse than just, an annoying person. Catching malaria is worse. And various kinds of illness are always worse than just an irritating person that you're living with. So Ajahn Chah, he didn't want people to get sick, but he'd just give them different experiences to learn from, so that they weren't just dependent on always creating the ideal place and getting rid of the people they don't want, getting rid of the situation they don't want, but just learning to adapt and be more patient and come back to the mindfulness rather than just trying to arrange the world around to one's liking. That's one of the traps we fall into as meditators. We still have craving, we have desires, we follow ideals, we want things to be a certain way. When they're not, we get irritated, upset, complain, want to move, want to change. And you can't run forever, can you? So again, Ajahn Chah would make a joke out of it and say, oh, you just want to move places all the time. You're not happy here, you're not happy there. You're no different from a mangy dog. Mangy dog has an itchy skin disease, but he doesn't realize it's the skin disease that's the problem. He thinks it's the place. So he sits down in one place and then starts itching and yelps a bit and gets up and runs away and finds another nice spot, sits down and thinks it's fine. And then after a while, it starts itching again and has to get up, yelping and move on. And you say some monks are like that. They're always moving because they complain here and then they go there and complain there. And they never find out that the real problem is their own lack of awareness and their own craving, which keep coming up. So Ajahn Chah used to say, face your craving, learn from it. Don't run away from it. Don't hide it. Try to learn. And that means sometimes you have to be willing to be in situations that are not your first choice or even your second choice. Maybe it's your third or fourth choice. Or, sometimes it's the hut you go in. When I first went to Ajahn Chah's monastery, they put me in because I was a novice monk. You're at the end of the line and there were about 60 or 70 monks and novices there. They put me in the smallest, darkest, moldiest little hut in the corner of the forest. And Ajahn Chah's forest was really damp, full of mosquitoes. Used to have malaria in the old days. Everything got moldy in the rainy season. And I was put in this tiny little kuti, this little hut. The walls had mold on them. Any cloth or furniture you kept in there long got moldy. There were termites eating the wooden posts. There were geckos and lizards all over the roof. You go in and there's mosquitoes everywhere. And you go, oh, this is awful. But everyone else is having to endure or had endured something similar. So you just learn to practice with it rather than run away or complain. Some people did run away. It's too much for some people, but that's just the way it was. The monastery was quite poor. The conditions were quite difficult, but you just learned. And, you ask any other monk, they say, oh, just be patient with it. Don't give in to your craving. Don't expect too much. Just work with the situation. That's what you learn. That's what kind of Ajahn Chah's motto was, or that's what his signature teaching was. Be patient with the conditions. Don't try and control everything to get it how you like. Just be patient. I remember I was in one little hut with moldy walls, very dark, damp, kind of unpleasant little wooden hut in the corner of the forest. And in the next hut was an anagarika. And they're like 8 precepts. There was a newcomer training to become a novice monk, but he hadn't yet been ordained. And he got so upset with the conditions, he would bash the wall some days. I'd hear this thumping coming through the forest, that he's taking out his frustrations on the wall and just kind of bashing the wall for a few moments to let off steam. It was so, for him, it was so difficult. So sometimes it could be quite challenging. Or monks would sometimes, stop talking to each other because one monk didn't like another monk. I'm not talking to you. And they'd meet every day but not talk because they had fallen into a mood. But you think about it, you think, well, it's better than having an argument or a fight. If they're just quiet, well, at least everyone else is quiet and doesn't disturb anyone. Sometimes I lived with monks for so long that two monks had fallen out and stopped talking, started talking again. Ajahn Chah used to say that. He'd say, oh, if you want to see impermanence, you see two monks, their relationship. So the first year or two, they're best friends and they talk about everything and do things together. And then something happens and they fall out and they stop talking, stop doing things together. They're still in the same monastery, but they don't talk to each other for another few years. And then you meet them again and they're back talking together again and they're best friends again. You just watch and the things will change. Because everything is teaching us. That's life, isn't it? People change, the conditions change. So if you want the fast track to gaining samadhi, peace of mind, strong mindfulness, blissful states in your meditation, you have to learn these lessons. How to let go of all these desires, wanting things to be the way you want, and be more accepting of the way things are. Sometimes you can change within small amounts of the conditions. In small ways you can affect them and improve or change things, but generally you can't. So better to change yourself, learn to change your attitude and bring up the mindfulness. You notice when you're mindful, your craving fades out, then even challenging situations you can face, you can be with. Difficult people, difficult weather, illness, disease, pain. You can be with these things when you establish mindfulness. I think most people learn that. They learn them with the number one priority in the practice is bring up the mindfulness, put effort into that and sustain it more. Because with mindfulness comes the equanimity, this detached awareness where even with challenging situations and difficult situations, you don't create suffering out of them. You know them, but you just keep your mind aware and peaceful as you experience them. And the same with the pleasant, the desirable things that happen. You don't get so lost in them that you're always seeking for them, craving for them, wanting them. You learn this place in the middle that Ajahn Chah talked about so much. Keeping your mind in the middle towards the conditions rather than always reacting to the conditions. Whether you get what you want or you don't, you keep your mind mindful in the middle. And you learn that in all postures, throughout the day, throughout the night. In all postures and all activities, you're developing this mindfulness. And he'd always say, it's like drops of water from a tap. If you open a tap, at first you'll just get drops of water, drop, 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 drops of mindfulness, moments of mindfulness. But you keep going, those moments of mindfulness join up to become a stream, like a stream of water, like when you open the tap further. And with that stream of mindfulness, you gain stillness of mind, quietness of samadhi. The mind becomes more firm, steady, and peaceful. And often you get the accompanying bliss, the piti and sukha, the rapture, the joy. It becomes more enjoyable the more continuous the mindfulness is. But what we're doing is working to turn those drops or moments of mindfulness into a more continuous stream. And that's where we need to practice, put effort in. And as the mind becomes more steady, it doesn't matter so much where you are, whether the place is noisy or quiet, there's a lot of people or a few people, the food is your liking or is not, the world is as you like it or it's not. That all doesn't matter so much once you're establishing mindfulness. Because as your mindfulness becomes more steady, then you can contemplate and reflect on things and learn your lessons. So if something makes you annoyed, you know that, oh, I'm getting irritated here, but rather than getting lost in the irritation, the anguish, the annoyance, you just know it. And you know it as a mood that's forming, as a feeling, as an emotional reaction, a train of thought maybe. It arises and then it passes away. And when you establish mindfulness, you can see that. So it doesn't bother you. Every day we meet many situations which stimulate different emotional reactions, liking, disliking, interest, excitement, boredom, anxiety, worry, fear. And life brings us all this stuff all the time. But our job is to bring up that mindfulness and sustain it more and more so we can reflect on these things and see they're temporary conditions of mind. They come up and then they pass away again. And they don't have to knock us over or make a problem for us if we know them with mindfulness and then reflect on them for the way they are. And Ajahn Chah would say, throw them all in those three baskets: impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self. Impermanent, they change, they're not fixed, they don't stay the same, they're not lasting. Unsatisfactory, they can't bring you lasting, permanent happiness because they don't stay unchanging. Change brings a certain agitation to us, and so you can't find permanent satisfaction or happiness in the different conditions that come your way. And not self. You can't stop other people saying and doing things. You can't stop the weather. You can't stop the way your body is. Sometimes it gets ill. You don't want to get ill, but it gets ill, or you have a pain. You don't want pain, but it happens. You get put into a little hut with lizards all over the wall and mosquitoes and mold and termites. Maybe there's nothing you can do about it, but you can observe your reaction and then let go. Just know it with mindfulness as a passing condition of mind. It's just a state of mind. And it will pass all the quicker if you establish mindfulness. Because when you lose your mindfulness, then you see the suffering. You grasp onto things, identify with each mood, the ups, the downs, the happinesses, the sadnesses. And you realize that's the challenge. And you can't make the world always suit you. So really you do have to come back to yourself, to your own mind, and learn from that. So I found the monks who stayed on with Ajahn Chah, and many lasted a whole lifetime with him, or since he died, still in the robes. They're the ones, they learned this lesson, how to go with the flow of conditions more than trying to always control the conditions and get them just how you like. Rather, come back to the mindfulness, establish that, and then reflect on things. Use them as teachers and teachings rather than just trying to control everything and push what you don't like away. Try and hold on to what you do like. That's actually quite tiring, isn't it? Always pushing and pulling, holding on to things, reacting to things. Your mind gets tired because there's a lot of controlling there, and it's not actually natural. The way of the world is it's actually going according to all kinds of causes and conditions, and you can't influence them all. So go with the flow rather than go with your emotions. You know your emotions, but then let go. Well, Father's Day is a good day to remember our teachers as well as our birth father, parents, but also our teachers, the Buddha. You might call the Buddha your number one father, biggest father, taught the best lessons in the best way. But also maybe in the more modern era, we have Lumpur Cha. Lumpur means venerable father. It's the way the monks refer to him, as well as Pome, mother and father sometimes. Lumpur, venerable father. And he filled that role very well. He's a very complete teacher, simply because he was very good at getting people to see themselves or know themselves, rather than just telling them all the time how it is or what they should be doing, but getting them to see for themselves. Because that's the role of a parent, isn't it? Bring their kids up or their students up to have the tools to learn for themselves, so then they can depend on themselves. One of Ajahn Chah's favorite phrases was Atahi Atano Nato. Learn to be a refuge to yourself, or learn how to rely on or depend on yourself. We can't always depend on our parents or our friends or our partner or this person or that person. Obviously, good friends are a huge part of our practice and our life, but in the end, you also have to be the good friend yourself. You can't always be seeking that externally. Well, maybe I'll leave you with these reflections tonight, and in a moment there'll be a chance to answer your questions.
Damayang Dhammagathaya Sadhu Karang Dadamase Sadhu 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 Anumodha